Good afternoon. Let's try this out. How's everyone doing? Okay. Friendly reminder, please sign in at the sign-in sheet. It's over here to my left, your right. My name is Kelly Mandrasina, and I am King County's Commercially Sexually Exploited Children, or CSEC, Task Force Coordinator. And I will be speaking today about a very limited area of the trafficking movement, just on commercial sexual exploitation of children here in King County, and what King County is doing to address this issue.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Moyes. I'm with the Department of Community and Human Services. I currently manage youth and family service programs. I have a background in working with domestic violence survivors and sexual assault survivors. And I've also been involved with the county's public awareness campaign for the last couple of years.
My name's Kathleen Morris, and I work at the International Rescue Committee. I'm the program manager for the Washington Anti-Trafficking Response Network. And my organization works with a few other organizations in King County and across Washington State to provide direct services to victims and survivors of all forms of human trafficking. And so we'll talk a little bit about the work that we do and the types of cases that we see.
So I'm going to begin talking, but a couple of things. King County Television is filming this, so please, if you do stand up, be clear of the cameras for us. And then we'll each talk, and then we'll have some questions at the end, and we'll just go from there. As I said, I've had experience working with survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, at-risk youth who are involved or are leading into the life of juvenile justice activity. And so has kind of wholeheartedly brought me into issues of human trafficking. So just a show of hands, who has heard about human trafficking, has heard about it from at least 2 years or more? All right, that's great. And anyone just maybe in the last year or less? Great. So I think today's focus is really getting the word out and people continuing to talk about it because it's not a taboo issue, and we really think it's important that everyone is able to talk about it, and I increase the awareness and getting victims out of the life of human trafficking. Under the U.S. Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, human trafficking is defined as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for one of three reasons: labor or services, commercial sex act through use of force, fraud, or coercion, or any commercial sex act if the person is under 18 years of age, regardless of the coercion. Some startling statistics: human trafficking is estimated a $32 billion criminal industry worldwide. This is just behind drug dealing, which is number one. In 2003, Washington State was the first to pass legislation to combat human trafficking. There are a few states, such as Wyoming, Arkansas, Montana, South Dakota, who has not even met basic laws against human trafficking. So I guess we're blessed to be in this state. Washington is noted as a hotbed for recruitment, and that's because of the borders we have along Canada, the ports, the trains, and the vast rural areas, and a dependency on agricultural labor. There continues to be a public misconception that human trafficking happens overseas, but it actually is happening locally here. Sex trafficking gets the most media attention, as labor trafficking is often hidden with victims isolated and threatened with harm if they speak up. Who are the victims of human trafficking? Well, they can be women, men, children, foreign nationals, or U.S. citizens. Trafficking cuts across all races, nationality, gender, age, and socioeconomic backgrounds. However, traffickers typically prey on individuals who are vulnerable. For example, undocumented migrants, runaways, at-risk youth, oppressed or marginalized groups. There is the national hotline, National Human Trafficking Resource Hotline. The number is 1-888-3737-888. They will respond to any calls and notify the local law enforcement to investigate calls. This was developed, starting back in 2002 by two people in Brown University coming across the issue of human trafficking. They slowly began their program called Polaris Project. In 2007, they founded the National Human Trafficking Resource Center and is nationally recognized as a focal number to help traffic victims get help. Or if someone notices something, they can call and notify, and they will, again, reach out to local law enforcement to investigate and see if there's something happening. They just recently released research from all their statistics. Their research began in 2008 and through 2012, so a 5-year time period. In that 5-year time period, they had 259% increase in calls regarding human trafficking. In the 5 years, they received over 9,000 unique cases of human trafficking that they actually investigated. They had over 29,000 phone calls during that time period. The 3 most common forms of sex trafficking reported to the hotline involved pimp-controlled prostitution, commercial front brothels, and escort services. Labor trafficking was most frequently reported in domestic work, restaurants, and sales crews. 41% of sex trafficking cases and 20% of labor trafficking cases reference U.S. citizens as the victims. So it is an issue that's happening to people in our community and not people, immigrants or foreign nationals. It's happening there as well, but it's happening here. Women were referenced as victims in 85% of sex trafficking cases and men in 40% of labor trafficking cases. On the website, the Polaris Project website, there are, if you want to reference and go to that site, there's definitely signs. If you're out in the community, there's some signs that are common among victims that are trafficked, such as not free to leave from their place of business, that their identity is not in their own hands. They're paid little or only through tips. They're not allowed breaks or have very unusual restrictions at work. If they're under 18 and providing commercial sex act, that's sex trafficking. Recruited under false promises concerning the nature and condition of their work. For their mental health, if they're fearful, anxious, depressed, submissive, tense, paranoia, avoids eye contact. Maybe they lack health care, look malnourished, have few or no personal possessions, not allowed to speak or have limited access outside of the home or their work. Those are just a few. Again, you can go into the Polaris Project and they can, there's more signs that you can look at. King County started taking a leading interest in raising awareness. Back in July of 2012, the County Council passed a motion to increase the awareness of human trafficking in King County. Their requirement in this motion is to utilize Metro. Metro, as you know, has advertisement. It's a moving billboard. King County Metro buses travels all around the county. What's better than having a moving billboard? So we reached out and did a lot of research and ended up working with New York Mayor Bloomberg at the time and his staff to get their ad campaigns that they utilized. And you'll see some posters that we have here today are some of the same images. And they were on the buses for approximately 6 months or longer, depending on the availability of that bus and that space. We included the national hotline because, again, there's not a designated hotline in this community for general human trafficking. Kelly will talk about one for sexually exploited children. Again, there's no data in this community or nationally about what the problem is, and the number of calls to police only indicates specifically if a person identifies as being trafficked. Generally, a victim of trafficking does not identify as being trafficked. They're being identified as having an issue that they've called the police, or maybe the police responded to a different situation, and somehow they've gotten help. But the data is still not collected because there's not a way to adequately collect it, although there are research teams at various universities that are working on that, but it's a really challenge to see how to collect it and how victims to identify by it. Currently, the council has asked us to continue to do our public awareness campaigns. So we're in the process now of developing our posters. We do have one over in English and Spanish over to your right on the table. And we are hoping to put these up in the various King County facilities, and we'll be reaching out to community partners as well to post them in their facilities, churches, other places where potential victims may be able to notice those signs and maybe make a call out, as well as being a community member. If you see the sign, you think you've seen something, call the national hotline. Let them decide if there is a situation, and they can get the police involved, and then you don't have to be any more involved in it, but knowing that you made the right decision to make that phone call. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Kelly.
Thank you. The first thing I'm going to say is anything I reference here as paper, I've provided copies up here, and if you email me, I will provide you with an electronic copy, and you're more than welcome to distribute. Everything's great, distribute, give the information, get it out there. So just let me know and I'll send you the electronic copy. I'm really glad that Stephanie mentioned the lack of data and how many people are actually being trafficked and who's at risk. Here in King County, Seattle specifically, in 2008, there was a study done funded by the city of Seattle. And the study was done by Dr. Deborah Boyer, and it's called Who Pays the Price? And it was the first time they tried to put names to, at the time, child prostitutes, or what we're going to call commercially sexually exploited children, put names to the children who were actually being exploited. And Dr. Boyer found that in Seattle, not King County, just in Seattle, she was able to name almost 300 children. And the estimate, which everyone agrees is conservative, is that there's 300 to 500 children in Seattle who are victimized. And for commercial sexual exploitation, that doesn't mean necessarily I give you money for sex. It's something tangible, a need for survival. It might be money, it might be food, it might be drugs, it might be a place to stay that night. So it's not the simple transaction of sex for money. It's anything the child needs to survive. And King County was very fortunate to realize this is an issue before other areas in the country have realized it was an issue. And we're very fortunate to have great organizations here in the area who decided to do something about it. And CCYJ, which stands for the Center for Children and Youth Justice, created what's called the Model Protocol. And it was the idea that these children, they are technically speaking breaking a law by prostituting. It's against the law for someone under 18 to get paid to have sex. But hold on a second. If you're under 18, you can't consent to sex, so how can you be guilty of a crime? And it was one of those light bulb moments where everyone realized this doesn't make sense. These people aren't criminals, they are victims. So the Model Protocol set about saying we need to have a victim-centered approach to how we address this and provide services to the people who are being exploited instead of arresting them and criminalizing them. And the Center for Children and Youth Justice talked to prosecutors, defense attorneys, service providers, law enforcement. They went around the state and had meetings, little summits, in which people provided their feedback on how to address the issue. And what was determined is that no one organization, no one agency, no one way of thinking could solve this problem. It had to be a multidisciplinary approach. And the idea is that we all need to come together and we need to work together to address this issue. And they funded 5, now 6 sites in Washington state to start a task force and implement the Model Protocol. And here in King County, we are one of the sites that was chosen. And the King County CSEC, Commercially Sexually Exploited Children, Task Force was convened in April 2003. It was convened by Judge Barbara Mack, who is a sitting juvenile court judge up at the Alder Street location. And our task force has judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, business organizations, law enforcement, service providers, community members, survivors, parents of children in the life. And we know we're still not representative of everybody that's out there, and we need more representation. And the task force is set about saying, how do we address this issue in our own town, our own area, all of King County? And the task force itself does not provide any services to people, but members of the task force do. And I'd like to talk a minute about the Bridge Collaborative. And the Bridge Collaborative is a partnership between Youth Care, Auburn Youth Resources, and Friends of Youth. And there's a pamphlet here, and I welcome everyone to pick it up. And it talks about what is available. And we have 3.5 FTE community advocates in King County, which means they can work anywhere in King County for youth who are either sexually exploited or, this is wonderful, at risk of sexual exploitation. We can help the children before any crime occurs. And these community advocates, by definition of being a community advocate, can go out into the community, work with the child, engage with them, and be a lifeline. For instance, many of the children, it was wonderful how Stephanie said this can happen to anyone, but it happens disproportionately to the more vulnerable. So children who are in children's administration, children who are at juvenile court, foster care, LBGT youth, youth of color, they're all more likely to be represented as sexually exploited children. And the advocates can go out and meet with them and connect. Because oftentimes children have social workers, they have teachers who care, they have all these people. But if a child is in crisis and there's 12 people around the room and that child won't call one of those 12 people, well, that doesn't do any good. We need a person in the child's life that they will pick up and call. And sometimes that's a law enforcement officer, that's a police officer they've interacted with. Sometimes it's their social worker, sometimes it's their teacher. But if that person doesn't exist, that's what the community advocate is there for, to be that connection, to be that lifeline for them. And they can work throughout King County. And we have a number, it's right here on the little card, you're welcome to pick it up. It is the 24/7 CSEC hotline. You call this number, one of the 3.5 community advocates is going to answer that phone and talk to you. And it can be as simple as, I think I know a child who might be exploited, I don't know what to do. It could be, I just would like a little advice. You call this number, they're gonna answer it and they're gonna talk to you. If you don't wanna talk to them, you can email and provide more information. The email is especially relevant for law enforcement or people like that who want to provide more detail. And the email is communityadvocate@youthcare.org. And again, everything's in the flyers over here. And that way, the advocate will meet with the child, and because it's a voluntary service, they just get to engage with the child on their desires. And one thing we found is that a lot of the children will like to meet the advocates at Starbucks. I'm like, Starbucks, why Starbucks? It's more expensive than some other coffee shops, and a lot of other trafficked children won't go there, so they feel comfortable talking in an environment they won't see other people at. So little things like that. A community advocate can meet them out in public, not at juvenile court, not at their social worker's house, and it's just wonderful. And the task force, I feel, is uniquely situated to address how we treat these children in our unique agencies, in children's administration, in juvenile court, how we treat them. We're fortunate in King County that no child is going to be charged with prostitution. Our prosecutors are not going to do that. That's wonderful. These children are committing other crimes. They're stealing, they're assaulting, they're taking cars, they're doing drugs, and so they are coming to the attention of juvenile court and prosecutors and defense attorneys for other crimes. And the fact that they're trafficked is something that needs to be known for negotiation purposes, and were they coerced into doing the crime that they're charged with. And so this is part of the conversation, but no child in King County is going to be charged with prostitution, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. And the task force has been in place for a little over a year now, and the Community Advocate Program began the 24/7 number as of May 5th. And from April, May, and June, we had 40 deduplicated independent referrals to the phone number. And I think that's wonderful that 40 children were referred. I think it's horrible that 40 children were referred. And our goal is to get out there and get the phone number more widely known. It's 1-855-400-CSEC. And the phone number's there. Pick it up, call it, distribute it. And we want people to be aware of the issue. And to that end, we have what we call the Red Flags Cheat Sheet. And this has red flags of commercial sexual exploitation, guiding principles, how you interact with the children. How do you identify an at-risk youth? What questions do you ask, and how do you help? And again, we've got the phone number there. You're welcome to pick this up, and again, I will email you the electronic copy and you can distribute it to your heart's content. We want the number, we want the red flags out there. We also have a Spanish language version. Everything's identical, it's in Spanish. I will email it to you. Let's get it out there. If there's other languages you'd like to see it in, let me know. We want to be culturally responsive and get this in languages that we feel would be appropriate. The last thing I want to tell you about is I'm very, very happy to mention a men's march that is happening. This is Saturday, August 9th. It's Men's March Against Demand. Unfortunately, this is a very gendered issue, and the buyers of sex are disproportionately male. There are some wonderful men in the community, and they want to address this as men speaking to men. It is not acceptable to buy sex in any way. And they are having a march, and it is on Saturday, August 9th at 10 a.m., and it starts at Seattle Center. And I would love for people to go out there and show their support that it is not acceptable to buy sex. There's flyers over there, and there's a Facebook page to like and share. And I will gladly email you flyers if you want to put them up in your own work environment. So thank you very much.
Hi again. So again, my name's Kathleen Morris. I am the program manager for what we refer to as WARN, the Washington Anti-Trafficking Response Network, and there are brochures over on the table. We have, our program's been in place for 10 years now. And we were initially funded back in 2004 to provide comprehensive services and intensive case management to victims and survivors of human trafficking. At that time, our funding focused not even primarily, but exclusively on foreign nationals and immigrants who are victimized through human trafficking. And now, over the last 2 years, our funding has been expanded, and so we actually serve all victims and survivors of human trafficking, including U.S. citizens and foreign nationals. That being said, the depth of our experience is really in serving immigrants who've experienced some form of forced labor service in Washington State. Both Stephanie and Kelly, sorry, I was like blanked out, talked about data and the numbers. And I was just meeting with a couple of different delegations from other countries, and they were asking us about the numbers in the U.S. And it depends on what agency you ask, because we all keep track of the people we encounter, but we are all encountering different people. There may be some overlap. But I went to a training a few years ago, and the FBI presented numbers, and Homeland Security Investigations presented numbers, Polaris presented numbers, and the agency that funds programs like ours presented numbers, and they were all very different. So what I can say is that over the last 3 years, we've had an outreach program that's focused on identifying victims of human trafficking, and across 6 agencies across Washington State, we've identified 250 potential victims of human trafficking, and that was a direct engagement with the individual. We don't just say like, oh, we heard about some people over here that might be victims of trafficking, but so it's really from direct interaction across 6 different agencies that provide victim services. WARN is made up of the International Rescue Committee, which is the organization I work for, API CHIA, which used to be called the Asian and Pacific Islander Women and Family Safety Center, until they merged with an organization called CHIA. And so now API Chaya provides services to survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual assault, mainly in the South Asian, Asian, and Pacific Islander communities. But through our funding and our program, they serve people from all different communities and all different backgrounds, both immigrants and U.S. citizens. We also partner with Youth Care, one of the partners that Kelly talked about. We fund a full-time case manager at Youth Care who provides direct services and intensive case management to youth ages 12 through 24 who've experienced any form of human trafficking. So because Youth Care tends to serve runaway and homeless youth, we are predominantly seeing folks that they identify being exploited through commercial sex work. But we also have seen a few cases at Youth Care where young people have been exploited through other forms of labor or service. With our, serving foreign nationals for so long, we actually, for the first 8 years of our program, 90% of our clients came from a labor trafficking situation. Many of them were engaged in domestic servitude, where they were living in someone's home and providing or acting as a housekeeper or a nanny for the family. Those cases are really shocking, I think, because generally the traffickers are like the people that live next door to you. They're professionals. We had cases where the husband was an engineer and the wife was a nurse. We had another case where the couple who were the traffickers were both medical professionals. So just seemed like very normal middle-class family who had an aunt that came to stay with them and watch the children. Little did everyone know that this aunt was being abused verbally, not being paid for the services she provides. In most of those cases, the people that we serve report working 14 to 16 hours a day, from very early in the morning till very late at night, providing all of the household duties that need to be done, and never being allowed to leave. And if they are allowed to leave, being told, well, but if you talk to anyone, you're going to get arrested because you're here illegally. So the threat of deportation or immigration consequences is a huge threat that traffickers use against immigrant victims to control them. And it's a pretty effective means of control given the fear in immigrant communities around being deported and around what might happen if somebody is found out. We've also seen trafficking cases in construction work involving quite young boys and men. We've had several boys from Central America be brought here, sometimes with their parents and sometimes alone, and then forced into different forms of construction work, which seems odd because you think you would notice a 13-year-old or 14-year-old working on a construction site, but it tends to be an unregulated area, and again, the traffickers use a lot of means of control and fear to make sure that nobody knows what's going on. We have also seen young boys and men from Central America that were brought to the United States and then forced to sell drugs. So that might be an illegitimate form of work, but it is a form of service that benefits someone else, and these young people were being forced into that. We also have seen cases in restaurants. Agricultural work is a big area. We don't think we've seen even remotely what really exists in that industry because it's very hard to get information into migrant farm worker communities, although that's something that we're working on across Eastern Washington and Western Washington as well. So what we do in order to increase identification and access to services for people is we really do try to go to the trusted providers in any community. So we do work with farm worker outreach programs, for instance. We work with El Centro de la Raza and other community-based organizations that serve specific vulnerable communities, including Youth Care that serves runaway and homeless youth. And we really make sure that they understand what the signs of human trafficking are and what services are available to people. And I guess just to give you a little information on services that are available, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act that Stephanie spoke about provided protections for both immigrant and U.S. citizen victims of human trafficking and created programs like ours that provide direct services to these folks when they're coming out of a trafficking situation and need basically everything from food and clothing and a safe place to stay, all the way to legal services, and job training and job placement. So it really is a pretty intensive work. Our case managers really walk side by side with the clients who we serve to rebuild a new life for themselves that's free of exploitation and abuse. And we really do it on their terms. So we provide individualized services. There's no one protocol for any person that we serve because everybody has different needs and different goals. We're really dedicated to self-determination. So sometimes we have clients that make decisions that we think create safety issues for them, but we also continue to support them in the best ways we can. We safety plan a lot with our clients. Our case managers ride the bus with our clients to learn how to read the stops that they need to get off on, how to get to all the places they'll need to go for resources. So it really is a lot of skill building along the way, as well as providing emotional and moral support and all these basic needs. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act also provided legal protection for immigrants who are victims of human trafficking as well as some other crimes. And there's one form of immigration relief called a T visa, which is specifically for victims of human trafficking. And those are significantly underused. A lot of people say, oh, well, isn't somebody just going to claim to be a victim of trafficking so they can get immigration relief? And fortunately and unfortunately, it's actually a very difficult process. And so we actually have had a lot of success in getting T visas for the clients we serve. But they do the hard work. They have to recount the story of what they've gone through. They are required, one of the requirements is to be willing to cooperate with an investigation. And so that could mean as little as reporting to law enforcement, and it can be as much as testifying in trial against the trafficker. And we've run the whole spectrum with our clients. We've sat in courtrooms and supported them as they testified and faced their abuser. And we've also had clients whose cases were never investigated. So there is a range of things that can happen. There's also a U visa, which was created by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and that provides immigration relief for immigrants who are victims of a variety of crimes. There's about 40 some odd crimes that are on the list that qualify for a U visa. This also requires somebody to be cooperative in an investigation and prosecution. And the U visa actually requires a signature from law enforcement stating that that person was cooperative. The T visa doesn't require it. We can submit that in addition, but it's not required. So these are pretty regulated forms of relief for people who are victims of crime. And they are, it's a process and it can be really traumatic for people, but it also offers them one of the foundations that they need to build a new life because it allows them to be able to work legally in the United States and to live here legally and not have that fear of being deported always behind them. So that kind of covers the realm of our services to some degree. It's very broad strokes. I guess I just like Stephanie said, I think it's really important to talk about who is victimized in this way. And we've had clients from over 40 countries come through our program, including the U.S. And I think that's really telling about Seattle and how diverse our community is and all the different groups that exist here and the different immigrant groups that come here. I have colleagues around the country who predominantly serve Spanish speakers or predominantly serve people from Asia, or South Asia. And so we don't have that luxury. We never know what language is going to be the next one that walks through the door. And so we try to be prepared for that. It's a difficult thing. But I think it does tell you a lot about just the diversity of people that we see victimized through human trafficking. We probably serve about 70% women, but that means we serve 30% men, and it can ebb and flow. The predominantly this year, in this calendar year, we've enrolled men as our clients. So we're just having like an influx of male clients right now. and then it'll change and switch. But over the 10 years we've been doing this, it's about 70-30. We do serve children, as I mentioned. We've actually had entire families come to the U.S. and be victimized through trafficking, and we've had a significant enough number that it's worth mentioning, that it's mom, dad, or a single parent and children, all forced into some form of labor or service against their will, without feeling like they have the ability to leave the situation. And both Stephanie and Kelly talked about signs, indicators of trafficking. And at the end of the day, what we say, if you can only ask one question, that question is, does this person feel like they have the choice to do whatever this thing is they're doing, whatever type of service or work or labor that they're engaged in? Do they feel they have the ability to say, no, I don't want to do that? And if that's the only question you can ask, that's probably the top indicator that someone is experiencing a human trafficking situation. I think I'll leave it at that. I've talked a lot about our program and the types of cases we see, and I'm most excited to take questions so that I can answer the things that you're all thinking about.
I'd like to add one thing to what Kathleen just said because it's so critical, the question about choice. And the answer isn't whether or not we see that the people have a choice in the situation, it's whether or not they see they have a choice in the situation. If you're 15 years old and you believe that your family doesn't have money to pay rent next month, we might know that there might be rental assistance or there's other options out there. But if you don't see there's a choice, that's how it has to be seen. If somebody, it's their own view of that choice.
A couple of questions. One is, my understanding is that a lot of times people that are drawn into this situation are told, oh, this really spiffy job is happening if you come here, and often you're committed to either paying a fee to be able to get there, or you will owe a big fee to get there. And my understanding is often the families back home, it's threatened that if you don't come up with that money, that they know where these people live, they will get the families coerced, or violence or whatever will happen. How do you respond to that kind of situation?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. So just to reiterate the question for the microphone, she was saying that she's heard that a lot of people are drawn to the U.S. or to a trafficking situation with promises of a really good job and making good money, and oftentimes they're borrowing money in order to come here in order to accept that job, and so they're in debt to somebody because they came here, and then oftentimes that debt is used as a means to threaten family as well, and I think I didn't actually talk as much about the means of coercion and control that traffickers use over their victims. And I think this actually is across the board true, regardless of what population you're talking about. But debt is one of the huge things that traffickers use. And so even if it's a pimp engaging a 15-year-old girl, he might say, well, you've been staying with me, so you owe me rent. Or I don't like it when you swear, I'm going to charge you every time you swear. So it is using that additional debt that is added on. With immigrants, tremendous number. In fact, I think all of our clients, when they first come to us, they say, well, I still owe them $10,000. And we have to work for a long time to convince our clients that they don't owe that money anymore. They never should have owed that money, and that the person that imposed that debt on that was not a good person. And so that is something we really work through with our clients. I think the other thing I didn't mention is that I think a lot of people's perception is that foreign nationals come to this country illegally and then get into a trafficking situation. A lot of our clients came to the U.S. completely on legitimate visas, whether it's a temporary worker visa or came on a tourist visa or a student visa across the border, or came through the airports completely legitimately. But a lot of times they did incur a debt in order to accept a job here. Even if they come on a work visa, they have debt back home. And so I have people come to me and say, I came here with promises of a job. I expected to work here for 3 years, and that would have given me enough time and pay to pay off the debt I incurred in order to come. And now my boss was abusive and I had to escape the situation, and now I owe this debt back home and I have no way of paying it off. And really their most desperate thing is to get a job so that they can pay money back home or send money home for the family members. So those are all things that we experience. I would say 95% of the people we serve tell us that their family members were threatened. And we see that with youth involved in commercial sex work and adults involved in commercial sex work as well, especially when it's coerced or forced. And it's like, well, if you don't do this, I'm going to go get your little sister and she's going to do it because I know where your family lives. Because a lot of times that relationship may have started out as a boyfriend relationship. So the family may know where they live. With foreign nationals, we have families threatened all the time. I know what village you came from. I know that your mother works at this job, and the family is threatened with collecting the debt or with physical violence against the family. And I always say to people, if we can't have empathy around threats to family members, we can't have empathy around anything. I mean, we all have family. We all have people in our lives that we would protect no matter what. I always say if somebody threatened my mother, I would do whatever they wanted. It would be no question. I wouldn't even think twice about it, because that is like a huge thing that we all feel responsible for. And so it's something that happens in pretty much every case that we see, and it is a really powerful means of control over the victim.
But how do you reassure that person that the threats aren't going to be carried out or whatever?
Sometimes we can't. Sometimes we talk about safety planning for the family back home. We do work with law enforcement. We have some really individuals within law enforcement who we really trust, and they oftentimes will do whatever they can to provide protections to family members in other countries, but it's so limited. You know, if somebody's living in Bangkok, yeah, they have Homeland Security has an office in Bangkok and can like try to run interference, but it's so limited in what anyone can really do to protect people. We do a ton of safety planning with our clients. We safety plan at every single meeting. We always are talking about what are you doing to keep yourself safe. And when they have a concern about family members in another country, we have those same conversations with the client and sometimes with the family back home. How can you keep yourself safe given all the barriers to safety that exist? I will say, we have had people related to the traffickers approach family members back in the home country and say, your daughter or your son better not be responsible for getting my brother arrested. But we haven't had the physical threat carried out. So we have had the contact made. It doesn't mean, it's totally possible for those things to be carried out. We did have a case where many, many years before we came into contact with our client, she had attempted to escape from the trafficker. And within a month of that, the father of her children was murdered. She believes that was related. We have no idea if it was or it wasn't. There's very many reasons to believe that it was, but we don't know. But that's the power. Even if it's not, and again, just like what Kelly said about choice, even if the trafficker doesn't have the actual ability to carry out the threats, it's the perception of the individual that those threats will be carried out that's the most compelling piece. So that's what we do, is we really work with our clients to just talk out those fears, and to talk about the options that they have for safety. And then the other thing is that debt. It's looming over them. They're thinking about it. They're worried about it. And we really have to try to talk to them about, it's not a legal debt. This person can't control you by it anymore. You're working with us. You're safe. And if they have reported, we'll say you're working with the government and the government's on your side now. And so we do try to bring those things in and to help empower and reassure the person that we're working with. It's just every case is different, and it's just the process by which that individual is going to be able to move forward. We try to find that one path. Yeah.
So, given how relatively new all of this is, regardless of how old trafficking is,
Right.
What is the process for integrating into the Department of Education for taking this down to the next level, teaching and dealing with high school and middle school? Because as we all know, the younger grades grades are highly involved in a lot of drugs, and therefore they're gonna find out about this.
There is a subcommittee of the King County CSEC Task Force that's dealing with education. And we've looked at a lot of the curriculum that exists already. And the problem is a lot of the curriculum is fear-based. And a lot of it is victim blaming. Hey, you don't get trafficked. Well, that doesn't work. You can't tell someone to not be a victim. That's not a practical way of going about business. And we're looking to see if there is a curriculum out there that is not fear-based, that teaches empathy, positive relationship skills, and things like that. And if there isn't one, do we need to create one? But what it really comes down to is empathy and how we treat other people. And that's what we need to be teaching at a young age, before high school, before middle school. Unfortunately, the average age a child enters the commercial sex industry is 12 to 13. So if that's the average age, we need to be teaching kids a lot younger that empathy and that you cannot purchase another person. That it's not even something that should enter anyone's mind. You cannot purchase another person. And empathy is really where it's at. And this is something that we need to teach across the board to children, to young students, to high school students. And it's something that we as adults need to be emulating, that you can't purchase people.
Yeah, I would say we really support educational tools that inform students about root causes. And so, yeah, we do want to talk about signs and indicators, but we also want to talk about, cheap products and cheap labor and where that comes from and what the real cost to bring an apple to the market should be if we're paying people appropriately. And so it's the same thing, root causes. And I think empathy speaks to this entire issue. There are a lot of people trying to develop curriculums, but they are shockingly inappropriate, in my opinion. And so I think, it's sort of a long-term project as opposed to let's get it in there quickly. We've seen some really scary stuff that goes into schools, and I'm not sure how it gets in there. I will say I serve on a statewide committee that I always forget what the name of the agency is at the state level, but the education agency, whatever it is, they're part of that. So they are trying to learn from providers and from other people doing the work, like how to do this and how to figure out how to do it. The Washington State Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs has developed some healthy relationship curriculum that I think is really great. And so there is effort being made to kind of plant the seeds that prevent human trafficking and other exploitation, as opposed to just specifically going in and talking about how scary this is and how the girl next door is going to be kidnapped and put into this life. So I think that's I think we all agree that that's the way to approach it.
And I think it's very important that we realize we'd rather have a good curriculum than being able to say, look, we educated them, let's pat ourselves on the back and actually do harm, because there are some out there that do harm. And we really want to be careful that we're not actually educating people on how to be a good pimp. And so we want to be thoughtful about how we go about this.
Well, I understand that it's difficult to find the numbers from the victim side and the underreporting. Don't we have numbers on prosecutions? Like say the number of people in King County who have been sent away for trafficking?
Well, yeah, so I can tell you, I work as part of a federally sponsored task force with the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is here in King County, although they cover cases for the entire Western Washington. And as we've been working together for 10 years, so we provide victim services, they do the prosecution, and we work with law enforcement who does the investigation. They've prosecuted around 60 cases of human trafficking over the last 10 years. In Western Washington. We don't have King County specific numbers. I don't. And then we have served 150 survivors over 10 years, and that's just us serving them. We've also identified 250 just in the last 3 years across the state. So they may not have come into our services program. They're being served by another provider. But we do have numbers. We just don't know what percentage of the big issue that is. And I will say, tiny percentage of the people who we serve have their cases prosecuted. The standard for rising to the level of criminal prosecution is very, very high. And so I just think as a community, it's something that is not well understood, that not every crime gets prosecuted. In fact, very few of them do. Prosecutors and law enforcement have a tremendous amount of discretion and a limited amount of resources, so they have to apply those resources to the things they think will have the outcomes that they're looking for. And so we just kind of have to understand that. What I'm always kind of saying is, if you fund services, then everyone who needs services will get services, even if their cases aren't prosecuted. So that's why when I was saying all these different agencies have different numbers, it's because the FBI and the Department of Justice have their investigation and prosecution numbers, and that might be one prosecution, but it might be 20 victims. So they're all, it's hard to quantify and not to overlap and all those things. So we say we have numbers, but we have to put them in context, I guess.
And
Yes. Yeah.
And I can say, when we were first doing the bus ad campaign, we were doing a report to the county council on the data out there. We reached out to all the law enforcement departments in King County, the municipalities, and police officers don't have a checkbox if it's human trafficking, sex or labor trafficking. They actually may check a sex trafficking as domestic violence because it's a pimp and the victim, but that victim will say that he is her boyfriend, and so that gets marked as domestic violence. So it's not tracked as human trafficking, but in reality, it is human trafficking, and no one keeps the consistent data. And then again, a victim is not thinking, oh yeah, I'm a victim of human trafficking, and mentions that to law enforcement when they are when law enforcement are responding to the situation. And again, we reached out to our community providers as well, and a victim may go there because that's part of the issue of why they're going to an agency. But again, it's not marked as specifically human trafficking. So again, that data doesn't exist. And as Kathleen mentioned, everyone keeps data differently, and the numbers are differently. And the prosecutor's office, they will charge a crime that's best to get a conviction. So there may have been trafficking involved, but if that's not a strong conviction, that's not they're going to go for, because it's better to convict a trafficker on some charge to get them away, to allow the victim to get out and get the services and be free, than have that person not be convicted of any crime and then getting that victim back into the life, or jeopardizing her own safety or his own safety.
And unfortunately, we could prosecute every single pimp out there, and as long as there's still buyers, there's just going to be another person who comes along and fills that role. So unless we address the demand, we can prosecute every single person, and we're not going to touch it. So we have to look at how we as a society view human trafficking and what is not acceptable.
Tracy?
Kelly, can you speak to King County Sheriff's Office response to adult victims of sexual exploitation in light of addressing demand? I know that there's still a number of prostitution arrests and protocol around a regular.
Yes. So officially, my title is with commercially sexually exploited children, 18 and under. But what we're finding is that, unfortunately, oftentimes an arrest is the only way to get somebody services. So for instance, an adult that's arrested in the city of Seattle for prostitution, if a woman's 18, 19, 20, they're diverted and they're given services. And so arrests still do happen, but it's more of a way to connect somebody with services and do a diversion court instead of actually spending time in jail. And the King County Sheriff's Office, I have to say, I've been very impressed. There are wonderful detectives who work there who have been doing this for 20 plus years. The chief of staff has been to meetings, and we're working on doing a memorandum of understanding. And the King County, across the board, law enforcement in King County, I am so impressed with and how they're handling this, from patrol officers to chiefs of police. Unfortunately, oftentimes you need a carrot and a stick approach, and things are still illegal, and so things are still charged for adults. But the goal is that more purchasers of sex, more buyers will be arrested instead of the sellers. And that's the goal, and we're slowly transitioning in that way. But right now, it is still illegal it's still illegal for anyone to sell sex, whether you're 18 or under. Just if you're under 18, you're not going to be charged with it. No. But I am very impressed by law enforcement. We have great people here in King County.
We definitely are fortunate. Seattle PD and King County have definitely shifted their point of view and their perception of sex work and who's involved. And they really are trying to be victim-centered, to offer services. And, they're, because of the way the laws still exist, they are limited in sometimes in what they can do. But, Seattle PD changed the name of their vice unit to the high-risk victims unit. So in recognition that they're working with people who are victims. So, it's progress. We have a long way to go, but I would say that we're here in King County, we are ahead of the curve of the rest of the country. So it's something. There was another question over, did she go? Oh, sorry. Darn it.
Can you talk more about U.S. citizens and sex trafficking and kind of entry points? How do they get into that? Because I've heard the stories. My coworker was telling me about people that were on vacation and they were in a hotel and the bar and got friendly and then they're drugged and sex trafficked. So what are ways that you're finding people become sex trafficked?
Go ahead.
Pretty much if you've heard a story, that's happened. But most of what happens is, most of the children who are involved in sex trafficking are runaway or homeless youth. They're on the street, and it's a means of survival. And it might be as simple as you have a boyfriend and everything's, and I'd like to, before I go into that, I'm saying mostly it's young women. This happens to boys as well. It happens across the board to boys. It's less reported, it's less noticeable, and the trauma those boys experience is different, but it does happen to boys as well. But say you're a youth and you have a significant other who might be older, generally has more control, and they take you out, they've got a hotel, got some food, we don't have enough money to spend for the hotel the next night, I need you to go do this for me. And if you're in love and it's the first time you've been treated from their perspective in a loving way, they might be willing to do it because they see no other choice. And that's what it boils down to. If you don't see that you have a choice to say, no, I won't do that, you'll do it. And it's to pay for the hotel, it's to pay for food, to pay for clothing, however they see needing to pay for their survival. And yes, it does happen that people get kidnapped from, a soccer game and thrown in a trunk. It's called trunking. That does happen. But the majority is young, vulnerable people who are already at risk being taken. And there was one pimp, a reformed pimp, who said that what he would do is he would walk down the street and he'd see a woman and he'd say, wow, you're a beautiful young woman. And the woman who would look at him and say, yeah, thank you, he'd keep on walking. The woman who would ignore him, he'd keep on walking. The woman who would look down and, he noticed me and be very vulnerable, that's my target. That's who I want to get to. That's the person who's vulnerable, I can do it. By the time a pimp comes into contact with the child, they've had so much damage already done. The majority of the children who are sexually exploited commercially have been sexually exploited before money ever changes hands. And so that's how a pimp would see them, the vulnerable person.
And I would talk a little bit about people who find themselves in commercial sex work for a variety of reasons, right? Sometimes, and a lot of people say it was by choice. And then, you ask the next question, what were the other options? Right? And it could be by circumstance. So, yes, I think there is a tremendous focus on pimp-involved prostitution, where there is like a very clear coercion. But there's also people who, Kelly mentioned earlier, a young person who doesn't think that their family's going to make rent, that they might get kicked out. We're seeing more and more trends of young, particularly girls, but young people who were placed into commercial sex work by their parents, by their family members, traded sex with their child for drugs. So it's really ultimately, a child who does not come from a safe home, that doesn't have a safe home and a network to support them, and then they could be recruited by a pimp. They could find themselves trading sex for a place to stay because that's what they need to do to survive. And so there's a variety of different ways that plays out. And then they could have started doing that when they were 17, and now they're 19. That's the only way they've ever known how to make money. And going from that to working as a barista or whatever it is a big pay cut. And it also involves a tremendous transition in self-value and self-worth. And so there's a lot of things that bring somebody into sex work. And I work with people who really advocate for sex workers' rights and the rights of somebody, an adult, to say, I'm engaged in this work because I want to be, and supporting somebody in that situation to help them be less vulnerable to assault and other things that come along with that as a source of labor.
Can you talk a little bit more about the different parties involved in prosecution?
Prosecution? I wish we had a prosecutor here. Sure. You mean the difficulties of actually getting something prosecuted? Yeah. I mean, so when we talked about the definition of human trafficking, when we come into contact with somebody who says, I was forced or defrauded or somehow coerced into doing this labor or service for someone, we're like, okay, victim of human trafficking, we can provide you with services. The level for criminal prosecution is so much higher. They have to show the force, fraud, and coercion in a way that will speak to the court. Again, I'm not a prosecutor, so I don't speak criminal justice language very often, but there are laws, specifically criminal laws, that apply to these cases. And Stephanie was saying, sometimes it doesn't say human trafficking on the law. It'll say debt bondage, involuntary servitude, harboring an immigrant for purposes of work. There's a lot of different laws, federal and state, that apply to human trafficking that don't necessarily say human trafficking as part of them. So it's also having willing prosecutors that want to spend their time on these types of cases. They're really hard. You have extremely traumatized and potentially unstable victims and witnesses who are the basis of your prosecution. That can make it really difficult. We are lucky that we have a handful of prosecutors in King County and at the U.S. Attorney's Office who are willing to do these cases and willing to take the time to do them when a victim is willing to be part of it. And the other part is the ability of the victim to actually see that process through. Because it takes so long to go to trial, they can have made a ton of progress, and by the time they go to trial, just going to trial and being part of that can be a huge setback. And so that's another huge aspect and consideration for pursuing a prosecution. The prosecutors we work with have made a commitment to be victim-centered, and sadly that doesn't always play out in what's totally best for a victim. Once you sort of open that door to being part of an investigation or prosecution, really they can ask a lot of somebody, and really they also want to make sure that person stays available. So if somebody wants to make the choice to leave the state or to just be free from everything, it can be problematic. So there's just a lot of difficulty in these types of cases. Whereas if you're doing a drug case, you've got the evidence, right? All the drugs are there. We lock them away, and we'll have them when time for trial. So there's a lot of difficulties in these types of cases. But I will say that the prosecutors and law enforcement that we work with, even if they don't pursue an investigation or prosecution, they will do what they can, what's in their power to support the victims that we're serving. So that's really great. Thought I saw a hand.
So I wanted to press the issue. You spent a great deal of time talking about it from the victim's side. And it seems to have some good political will in the state. Great. Sheriff, police are doing their part. They've come around. We're not addressing still to this day the buyer. And I've often spoke at public legislative groups and said, when are we going to focus on the buyer? Why don't we have the political will to address the buyer? And I don't think we're going to solve this problem until we're willing to open up the other hand and address that issue. Do you think that's coming?
You are completely correct.
Well, I know
And
that.
there's going to be an announcement in September, but I can't speak about it right now. But
I
you are
can.
completely correct.
I can speak about it.
Okay.
Nobody told me not to say anything. I don't get funded by the county.
She can talk about it.
So what I know, and I mean, I'm not revealing anything that's secret. King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office has, and Seattle PD have decided to start focusing on the buyers. Yes, so it's in its infancy, and they are doing operations that focus on buyers. This makes prosecution easier because they actually don't have a victim. It's not reliant on a victim. And so that is something, and like Kelly said, there will be a big announcement in September about how they're doing this. But and some private funding has come into our county to address demand. And so that is happening.
Keep your eyes peeled for the organization. It's called OPS, the Organization of Prostitution Survivors, Seattle Against Slavery, and King County Prosecutor's Office. Keep your eyes open. September, demand is going to be addressed, and everything you said, completely true. And wait patiently.
Yeah.
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 Keep reading.
The seed is planted.
Yes.
Are there any other questions?
So, I'm wondering if you've ever encountered, through labor trafficking, young people who are made to go door to door to sell things? Has that come up?
Yeah, that was one of the, Stephanie said that was one of the top forms of labor trafficking that Polaris hears about. And it is. We hear about it really, really often. They just are prosecuting a case in Florida, a sales crew case. So it's the first actual prosecution that I know of, but I get calls all the time of, we were brought here from some other place, and basically we were forced to go door to door doing magazines or cleaning products or name the thing. And
Fictional products?
I haven't heard that one, but yeah, and I mean, and also just personally, I've had my friends and family call me and say, these people came to my door today and they were dropped off from a van, and and so yes, we are hearing it anecdotally, and we're trying to usually the calls I get from somebody in that situation, they just want to go home. So we're getting them a Greyhound ticket to go home or whatever. And, but we're not necessarily pursuing the cases because everyone's disappeared. They're usually abandoned when they call us. So, but yes, we do believe trafficking happens in that form on a pretty frequent basis.
How does that differ from, I mean, it's hard to tell if someone comes to your door because they'll say, I'm with this charitable organization and what we're doing is this, and so, I usually don't buy anything from anybody anyway, but, how can you tell the difference between someone that is actually doing legitimate work or perhaps like I was a Girl Scout, Girl
Yeah.
Scout cookies and that.
Yeah, but Girl Scouts generally don't go door to door anymore, right? And there's a reason for that. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, one of the things we look at is there another person sort of monitoring the work? Is there somebody did a van drop people off to kind of canvass the neighborhood? Do they seem fearful? Do they seem like, if I don't do this, I'm going to get in trouble? One of the things a friend of mine does is say, do you have a permit from the city that she lives in to sell door to door, just to kind of get rid of people, but they aren't going to. But it's all, I mean, those are the ways. And what's great about the Polaris Project hotline, so we have a number too that you can call that's local, but the Polaris is great because they can take tips like that are sort of like, the sales crew came into my neighborhood, they had this kind of van, this is a license number, this looked fishy to me, and that gets written up and sent to about a handful of people here locally who can actually pursue something. And so I'm trying to get off of those emails because I don't investigate things, but they have me on them, so I see them. But they do a great write-up of all the information that the person provides and then sends it out to people who can actually do something about it. So that's a great example of a tip that you can call into that hotline.
Who are you with, and ask
Yeah,
questions.
you can ask questions or you can not. You don't have to insert yourself into a dangerous situation. My mom's had some pretty scary confrontations with people when she, kind of says like, well, what's going on and what are you selling and who are you with? And can you give me more information on your organization? And she's had people really like be combative with her. And I'm like, don't do that. Just don't answer the door, because I want her to not. But, so those are, and I've had other friends have the same thing. And so you don't need to engage, but if something feels weird, call it into the hotline on the posters, and they'll write it up, and hopefully somebody will have the ability to investigate. I think we all have had those teams in our neighborhoods, and I don't know any legitimate people that do that, and so I think we'd like to see that too, like who's doing this and in a legitimate way, and where does it go? So it's hard to say how to tell the difference.
I have a question regarding the inconsistent data you touched on a few times. From a research perspective, what do you think would be most useful to you in terms of data for your work that you don't already have?
Well, we do collect data because we collect it on the clients that we serve. And so from my perspective as a service provider, we need to give people the funding and the tools to collect the data on who they're serving. We collect what we're asked to collect by our funder. So it's really specific. And I don't personally believe that academic research is the answer to what we need to know because it's too removed, in my opinion. That's a very biased opinion.
Hi, so I'm looking for projects for helping with these kind of situations. And I'm part of a Rotaract club at my college, and I was wondering if there's anything, we can do as just citizens that can help, maybe spread awareness to any kind of projects that have been done in the past that can be done to help that you can support,
Yeah, we have a great community organization called Seattle Against Slavery that does a lot of awareness raising.
They're doing the men's march.
They're doing that march coming up. And they do a lot of awareness raising around all forms of human trafficking. They have monthly or semi-monthly forums with different speakers. We had a team of graduate design students develop some outreach products or outreach materials for us. One of the things ideas they came up with was putting information into feminine hygiene products so that when someone's alone in a bathroom, they could read about what human trafficking is, and and the little piece of information is flushable, but they can tear off the phone number, and it looks like a fortune cookie number. So that was a really great idea that they came up with. It was it took us a lot of hours of sitting down with this team of design people for them to flesh out kind of what we needed, because we aren't thinking in terms of design. And so we just sort of told them like our barriers in reaching people that need the information, and they came up with some ideas around that. So there are some different projects around awareness raising that people have done, that students have done over the past years. Our program just lost our outreach coordinator, and so I hesitate to be like, call us and we'll talk to you about it. But you can call us and we'll talk to you about it. Well, it might take a bit to get a time on the phone, but that's what we try to do.
And there are various organizations like the MDT teams, Youth Care, Auburn Youth Resources, Friends of Youth, I know they can utilize volunteers. So I think reaching out to them. There's many other providers in the community, so it's not just those three, but there's definitely other providers that I'm sure would welcome some volunteers.
And you're welcome to email me. There are groups out there that do great work, and there are groups out there that are kind of scary. And if we can have those conversations. But I'd say one of the best things you can do is, right now, this is the hot topic. Don't let it just fade to the wayside. Make sure it stays the hot topic. Make sure that people stay interested in it. Write to your representatives, your senators, saying that this is an important issue. We need to fund services for the victims. We need to fund prosecution and law enforcement so that we can address demand. Make it stay a hot issue. Because we can speak as much as we want, but we need the public to say this is an issue and keep it in the limelight.
Any other questions?
When you were talking about prosecutions, wasn't it like a big news a couple of years ago that there was a pimp prosecuted? I mean, it was like, wow, we got one.
Well, no, I mean, pimps are prosecuted fairly frequently, but this was the first one where they used the Washington State Human Trafficking law to prosecute him, and he got a lot of years because of the use of that law. So, yeah.
Right. And that law, too, made a difference in their sentencing range, which was much above what it has been in the past. So that's kind of like the difference of going after him. And I think he had a long history, but because of the new law, they were able to send him away for many, many years that he'll probably not get out.
Yeah.
Tracy.
I can answer in broad strokes some of the questions about prosecution. I'm not a prosecutor, but I work in that office in the domestic violence unit, and I can tell you that there is a specified prosecutor that addresses trafficking cases in the special assault unit. And then in the domestic violence unit, that unit often is charging offenders with promoting prostitution. That's one of several charges. Like they were talking about, there's not going to be the human trafficking per se in the language, but I can tell you that in the past 10, 15 years in the domestic violence unit, there has been a big increase in the number of cases involving pimps, boyfriends, etc., promoting prostitution. So that's a fairly regular charge now.
Are there ever any confusions in undocumented communities where families are united and then certain members are asked to help in the household, where they might be providing childcare, I'm thinking? And so I'm just wondering, is there ever any confusion or is there abuse in those circumstances?
I mean, it really has to come from the individual, right? What they saw as their situation. No one's, saying, you're a victim of trafficking, come out of the house. So it really is what someone's perception of the experience they've had. And certainly there are times when family members provide domestic service in the house. It's different than when somebody is working 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, isn't allowed to leave, is threatened. So we have to see that there's some coercion involved, and choice around the issue. So, and we get that kind of feedback. We actually see communities protecting the abusers in a lot of circumstances. Well, they were trying to give her a better life, and they didn't do anything wrong. But the fact that they were telling her not to tell anyone what was happening is an indication that they knew they were doing something wrong. So it's things like that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all.
much.